The lamplight flickered, gold washing over the narrow room where Olivia, the black woman, forced into marriage in her sister's stead, shivered as the rain-soaked dress slid from her bare shoulder. The door closed behind Walter Morgan, the wealthy rancher who once hid himself beneath the guise of poverty. His gray eyes fixed on the fragile curve before him, deep and consuming. He stepped forward, rough hand settling on her chilled skin, warmth spilling into her until she trembled, caught between fear and yearning. They stood so close their breath mingled, hot and damp, like waves breaking against the shore. In that moment, class and deceit were stripped away, leaving only two bodies reaching for shelter in each other, as if this night alone could burn away the loneliness they had carried for so long. On a gray March morning, sunlight pushed weakly through the worn curtains of the Carter family's stone house. The smell of smoke lingered from the hearth, yet it could not lift the heavy air that filled the narrow room. Olivia Carter stood silent at the window, her hand resting on the cloudy glass, her dark brown eyes fixed on the muddy yard outside. Behind her came the sobs she knew so well, the voice of Shirley, her younger half-sister. Shirley sat curled on a wicker chair, golden hair spilling over lace, tears falling onto the fine blue dress, sewn by the best seamstress in town. "I cannot do it, Father. I cannot marry some poor veteran out on the barren Wyoming frontier. I will die if I must live in a shack on wind-swept grass. I cannot." Roy Carter, their father, stood in the center of the room, his face carved in hardship, eyes like stone, his fists pressed to the table as his voice cracked like a whip. "My daughter gave her word, Shirley. The letter was written, the dowry received. There will be no breaking it." Margaret, the stepmother of Olivia and mother of Shirley, sat pale beside him, her hands knotted tight. She looked at her own child with pity, but at Olivia as if she were nothing more than an outsider. "I did not know what I was doing when I wrote those letters," Shirley said, lips trembling though her eyes glimmered with calculation. "I have a future here. Samuel Morrison, the shopkeeper, wants me for a wife. He is wealthy, with a store and standing in town. I will not go live as the wife of a man with nothing but barren land." The room fell silent. Then Shirley, voice raw but sharp, spoke the words that struck like a stone in still water. "Let Olivia go instead. He has never seen me. In the photograph, the face is unclear. All he needs is a Carter daughter. That is enough." Olivia's breath caught. The words froze the air. She turned, finding every gaze upon her, her father's, her stepmother's, Shirley's false tears, wiped away. I cannot," Olivia whispered, her voice barely more than wind. Roy stepped toward her, slow and unyielding. "You can, Olivia. The Carters took his money. This family will keep its honor. A daughter of mine will stand by her promise, whichever daughter it may be." She lifted her eyes, searching for mercy in his, but met only cold resolve. In that look, she was not a daughter, only a burden to be spent. Margaret stayed silent, clutching Shirley's hand, whispering comfort, never once glancing Olivia's way. Pain welled in Olivia's chest like salt in an old wound. Since her mother's death, she had lived in this house as a shadow, laboring in silence, never claimed as beloved. Roy gave the verdict like a judge. "Thursday morning, the coach leaves. You will go. There will be no further word." Olivia's knees weakened. She steadied herself, swallowing the sob lodged in her throat. That night she sat alone in the cold attic. In her hands lay the letters of Walter Morgan, the man Shirley had written for months. Shirley had left them on the table, whether in carelessness or in mockery. By lamplight, Olivia traced the neat lines. Walter wrote of his years at war, of wounds carried home, of a life now built alone in a remote corner of Wyoming. In his plain words, Olivia felt a deep solitude, mingled with a yearning for a true home. "I need a companion, not an ornament, someone who can endure hard winters, dry summers, and still choose to remain when the day is done." Her rough hands trembled as she lowered the page. The words struck her heart, for they spoke not to Shirley, but to someone like herself. A woman long dismissed as a stepchild, overlooked for the color of her skin, never chosen. But would he still accept her when he saw not fair-haired Shirley, but Olivia, the daughter no one claimed? A draught stirred the lamp flame. Olivia clutched the letters to her chest. The coach would wait on Thursday morning. She would leave the Caris, house that had never been hers, bound for a land unknown, to keep a promise her family would not. In the stillness, she whispered, a vow to herself. Even if he turns me away, even if the road leads into darkness, I will go as myself, not a substitute, not a shadow. Downstairs, Shirley's tears had ceased. Laughter drifted from the parlor where mother and daughter spoke of dresses and parties. In the attic, Olivia folded the letters into a small wooden chest beside her worn clothes. Her eyes shone with fear and a spark of resolve, as if within the cruelty of it all, she had found the faintest flame of hope. Morning would bring the coach, and with it, a story no one in the Carter family could foresee. That morning the sky still lay under a thin veil of mist, the earth damp from the night's rain. On the worn steps of the Carter house, Olivia stood silent, both hands clutching a small wooden chest packed with a few faded dresses and Walter's letters. The hired coach from town waited at the gate, its wheels cutting deep circles in the wet ground. Margaret stepped out, shawl hanging loose about her shoulders, a strained smile fixed on her lips. She handed Olivia a small bundle, wrapped in gray cloth. I put together some dry bread and apples. At least you'll have something to eat along the way. Her voice carried a note of duty, but her eyes slid away, hurried, without the weight of farewell. Olivia dipped her head, receiving the bundle with both hands. Thank you, Mother, she murmured. The word came by habit, bitter on her own tongue. Roy Carter did not appear. He had gone to town early, claiming business. From behind the curtain upstairs, Shirley's bright eyes watched not with sorrow, but with relief. Olivia knew it well. She turned and descended the steps. Each stride felt like cutting loose a chain that had worn her down for years. When she climbed into the stagecoach, her heartbeat thudded heavy, trembling with fear and some strange sense of release. The road stretched long into the west. Mountains in the distance rose pale and blue, while ahead lay only dust and wind. In the endless creak and groan of wood and leather, Olivia folded inward, her thoughts circling the same words. Bastard child. The name clung to her like a shadow. All her life she had heard it from neighbors, from children in town, even within the walls of her own home. Her father had struck her rarely, yet his cold gaze carried a weight heavier than any blow. She remembered one summer evening at 12, when Margaret scolded her for spilling a pitcher of milk. Shirley had laughed and said, "You're just a bastard. My mother doesn't need you here." The words still burned after all these years. Now, forced onto this stagecoach, Olivia understood more clearly than ever. No one had truly wanted her to remain. The coach rolled on, pulling Olivia farther from the town she had known. The sky cleared, sunlight spilling across the wide prairie. She sat still, caught between dread and resolve. Ahead waited a stranger, a harsh country, an uncertain fate. Yet at least it was a future she herself would face, not the shadowed life inside the Carter house. The wheels ground over rutted earth, each turn opening a new page. Olivia laid her hand on the chest, closed her eyes. With the steady clatter of iron and wood, she told herself, "No matter what, I will keep walking. I will find my place where he is waiting." Outside, the road stretched on toward distant Wyoming, a thin line drawn between hope and destiny. The Cheyenne stage stop came into view after days on the road, nothing more than a row of rough wooden buildings roofed in shingles, dust clinging to every step and sill. The coach wheels ground to a halt, the crack of the driver's whip splitting the air. Olivia hugged her small wooden chest tight against her, heart pounding so loud she feared the passengers beside her could hear. When the door swung open, afternoon light poured in. Olivia stepped down slowly, her dark boots sinking into red dust. Weariness shook her legs, yet the weight in her chest was heavier still. Among the scattered crowd, one man stood tall, his frame marked against the horizon. He wore a faded work shirt, dark jeans, and boots dulled by miles of dirt. His hat brim cut a shadow across half his face, leaving only the gray of his eyes and the hard line of his jaw. This was Walter Morgan. He scanned the dismounting passengers. When his gaze fell on Olivia, she caught the flicker of judgment, the momentary darkening in his eyes, as though the thing he had hoped for had slipped from reach. Walter stepped forward, his voice gravelly, clipped. "Your name?" Olivia clutched the handle of her chest, lips dry. "Olivia Carter," she answered, soft but steady. Walter held her in silence, his gray eyes sweeping from her dark, neatly tied hair, across her sun-browned face, to the rough hands gripping her chest. His brow tightened. "The photograph showed a girl with fair hair. That is not you." The words cut, though she had expected them. Drawing breath, Olivia set her chest down, hands folded before her skirt. "The girl in that picture was Shirley Carter, my younger sister. I have come in her place." Walter stilled, lips pressed in a hard line. Prairie wind swept dust between them. Olivia lowered her gaze, forcing each word out heavy as stone. "My father compelled it. Shirley would not come, but the dowry was taken, the promise given. You have every right to be angry, even to send me back. But I ask you, give me a chance to speak." Walter folded his arms, his eyes fixed on her face. He asked nothing, offered no sympathy. The silence stretched until Olivia felt herself hollow, save for the pounding in her chest. At last he spoke, low and cold. "Do you understand what you're walking into? Out here, no one survives on tears. You don't look built for this land." Olivia raised her head, her dark eyes kindling. "I've endured all my life in a place where no one wanted me to exist. I cannot promise I'm stronger than others, but I will not run." For an instant, something shifted in his gaze. He turned away, reached down, and lifted her chest as if it weighed nothing. "Come, the ranch lies a few miles on. You'll learn soon enough whether you can stand." Startled, Olivia froze as his hand brushed hers when he took the chest rough, calloused, yet warmer than she imagined. Blood rushed to her cheeks, and she followed quickly, afraid to dwell on it. They passed through the crowd, Olivia feeling the sting of curious, even mocking, stares. A white man, broad and strong, walking beside a thin, black woman, in worn clothes. The contrast was too sharp to ignore. Yet, Walter strode on, long steps unbroken, as though the whispers did not exist. At the hitching yard, he set her chest onto a wagon bed and held out his hand. Up, her foot trembled on the step, skirt brushing against a dust-caked wheel. She slid onto the seat, the creak of leather and the snort of horses filling the air. Walter climbed beside her, shoulders broad, carrying the scent of sweat and worn leather. The wagon jolted forward. Each rut in the road rattled through her frame. Olivia kept close to her side, fingers clenched in her skirt. Walter guided the reins with steady hands, eyes fixed on the road that stretched into the prairie. He spoke little, but his glances weighed her, as though waiting to see if she would break before the land even began its trial. At last she broke the silence. "I know I am not the one you expected, but I read your letters. I know you asked for someone who would not flee when the days grew hard. I have nothing but these hands and the will to endure. If you allow me the chance, I will prove I am not a burden." Wind tugged loose strands of her hair across her brow. Walter looked once, his eyes sharp, but no longer entirely closed. A faint sound escaped him, half a grunt. "Words come easy. The land will tell me the truth." Olivia fell quiet, yet within her stirred a fragile hope. At least he had not turned her away. Evening stretched across the prairie. The sun burned red, sinking like a great coal behind the far ridges. On the swaying wagon, Olivia turned her eyes to Walter. His face was marked by years and hardship, yet carried the stern resolve of a man unbroken. For one heartbeat, he caught her gaze. They looked at one another, no words, no change of expression, yet something passed between them, swift and unspoken, like a skipped beat of the heart. Then, Walter faced forward again, snapping the reins for greater speed. Olivia exhaled, hand tightening on her skirt. She knew then, this journey had only just begun. The wagon rattled on for nearly an hour before the road opened to a sight that stole Olivia's breath. From a distance, long fences stretched with no end in sight, circling a vast spread of land. Sunset gilded the prairie in gold, casting its glow over a herd so large she could not count them. She sat still, her heart quickening. In his letters, Walter had written of a small ranch built by his own hands, of lean years and want. Yet before her now stood something far greater. Stout barns, sleek horses running in the corral, outbuildings scattered like sentinels around a solid two-story house. Workers moved everywhere, leading horses, carrying water, sweeping yards. All turned their heads as Walter's wagon rolled into the yard. Some tipped their hats, but their eyes fixed on Olivia, the black woman seated beside their boss. She swallowed hard and straightened. The air pressed heavy, making her feel small and out of place. Walter drew the reins, the team halting before the wooden steps of the main porch. He climbed down first, then offered his hand. When his calloused palm closed over hers, blood rushed to her face. The touch was brief, yet carried a force both rough and strangely steady. "Down," Walter said, voice low and gruff, without tenderness. He hefted her wooden chest onto his shoulder with ease, striding into the house without another word. Olivia lingered on the porch, glancing about once more. This was nothing like she had imagined. Not poverty, but abundance, order, and life. A question stirred in her chest. Why had Walter written otherwise? Inside, her astonishment deepened. The floorboards shone with polish. A great stone hearth claimed one wall, and shelves groaned with books. On the long table lay a hand-stitched cloth, a vase of fresh wildflowers. A Persian rug spread dark and heavy across the room. It was not opulent, but everything bore the mark of care and prosperity. She brushed her hand over the carved arm of a chair, her palm burning. This was not the dwelling of a poor veteran scraping by. This was the home of a man who had succeeded and hidden it. Walter set her chest in a corner, then turned. "Your room's upstairs, at the end of the hall. But first," he cleared his throat. "You're tired. Come to the kitchen." Olivia nodded, following him into a broad, warm space. The scent of stew mingled with fresh-baked bread. On the table waited a pot still steaming, a loaf cut in thick slices, a plate of vegetables. Walter sat at the head and motioned for her to take the seat across. His hands gripped fork and spoon with unhurried strength. The room filled with little more than the scrape of metal and the crackle of firewood. Olivia bowed her head, eating slowly to steady herself. Yet she felt his eyes on her, watchful, weighing, not harsh, not unkind, but searching. She bit her lip, and when she dared look up, she met his gaze. The gray eyes that so often seemed cold now held something else, not pity, not disdain, but something near to curiosity. Heat flared in her cheeks. She dropped her eyes to her soup, fear and a thin strand of hope mingling within her. Afterward, Walter pushed back his chair and stood. "Tomorrow I'll show you the ranch. You need to know what you're up against." Olivia set down her spoon, her voice low but firm. I know I'm not the one you expected, but if you give me a chance, I'll prove I won't run. I am not Shirley." He paused, turned his head. For a breath, his gaze cut straight through her. No words came, only a brief nod, before he strode toward the stairs. At the first step he spoke, his deep voice carrying through the wooden room. "You don't need to be anyone else. You only need to survive this place." Olivia stood frozen. Sometimes a few words bore more weight than any fine speech. That night, in the small room prepared for her, she sat on the bed, hand resting on the crisp pillowcase. Through the window, moonlight poured across the pasture, silvering the cattle scattered like dark stones. Far off, Walter's shape showed on the porch, pipe glowing, the flame lighting his features in brief sparks. Olivia watched, her chest restless. This man was unlike any she had known. Gruff, tight-lipped, cloaked in mystery, but there was a strength in him she could not look away from, and beneath it, she felt the stirring of curiosity, his toward her, and hers toward him. Fear still clung, loneliness still pressed close, yet alongside them, a strange seed had been sown in her heart. Tomorrow she would face the truth of this place, and perhaps the truth of Walter Morgan, the man whose letters had not matched the life he lived. The rooster's call broke the dawn, yet the mist still clung to the fields. Olivia had been awake long before, rising from her plain little room. The sky lay dim, but her hands moved with the rhythm of labor learned from childhood, not waiting for command. She lit the fire, coaxing coals into flame, the scent of dry wood filling the still kitchen. Bacon hissed in the pan, bread sliced firm beneath her knife. Her heart beat faster than the knife's rhythm. This was her first morning tending the needs of a stranger. She had never been a wife, not truly. Yet the years of being put to work had taught her order, thrift, and the patience of steady labor. Her movements bore no flourish, only quiet skill. Walter's boots sounded on the stair. He paused a moment at the kitchen door, his gray eyes fixed on the slight figure bent over the stove. He said nothing, only watched, as if habit had long taught him to study the world in silence. The table stood ready with a simple but filling meal. When Olivia carried the steaming coffee, Walter sat, giving a brief nod. "You're used to this," his voice came, rough and even. Olivia hesitated, then dipped her head. "Since my mother passed, I've managed on my own. There was no one else to lean on." She looked up and met his gaze, sharp as a knife's point. Words spilled before she could keep them back. "Maybe it was because I was never as pretty as Shirley. My father never spared me the affection he gave her. I had to labor to prove I was worth anything at all. But proof never changed a thing." Walter's hand stilled on his cup. His eyes softened, not with pity but with something quieter, curiosity, recognition. He gave no answer, only a slow nod, as if marking each word deep within. The days that followed fell into rhythm. Olivia rose early, cooked, worked the garden, watered plants. When the sun burned high, she moved to the barns, brushing horses, filling troughs. Sweat darkened her back, yet she spoke no complaint. Each time she glanced up, Walter was there on the porch, by the fence, at the edge of the yard, silent, watchful. He did not interfere, did not offer help. He only looked, as though weighing her endurance. And strangely, that gaze gave Olivia strength. To falter would be to betray not only herself, but also the stern eyes that measured her. By week's end, Walter spoke. "You'll need a few things. Dresses, proper boots. Come with me to town." Olivia froze, uncertain. She had owned little more than patched rags all her life. The thought of being led by him to buy her own clothing struck her with a strange, nervous beat in her chest. The town bustled more than she expected. Wooden shops, voices calling, hooves striking dirt. Walter led her into a fabric store, where the Italian proprietress spread bolts of cloth with bright hands. Olivia shrank before the colors, the fine stitching, her rough fingers brushing fabric that seemed to belong to another world. Walter chose for her muted blues, pale browns, a length of gray wool. "These suit you better than frills. Sturdy, honest, like you." Her heart lurched at his words. On the way back, he stopped at a smaller shop, buying a silk scarf, deep green as riverstone. Outside, he paused, opened it, and gently draped it around her neck. His rough hand grazed her skin, lingering just a moment, whether by will or chance, she could not tell. Warmth flared from that touch, and her lips trembled. "Beautiful," Walter said, his voice low, eyes steady on her. "It suits you." The moment stretched long, though no more than a breath. Olivia dropped her gaze, cheeks burning. The scarf lay light upon her collar, But it was his hand she still felt most keenly. That evening, back at the ranch, Olivia hung the scarf over a chair, her chest still stirred with every memory of his hand, his voice. Walter Morgan remained a man of silence and shadows, guarding more than his wealth. Yet in his quiet, sometimes clumsy ways, she sensed a door barely opening. She could not see where it led, but for the first time in her life, a man had looked straight at her, not comparing, not dismissing, and spoken the simple truth. Beautiful. It suits you. And that was enough to spark a belief within her that she was no longer only the bastard child, no longer just a substitute. The wind screamed like a wounded beast, lashing against wood and tin until the whole ranch shook. Rain poured in heavy sheets, drumming the yard and fields, blurring sky into earth. In the cattle barn, the herd bawled in panic, some crashing against the fence, eyes rolling white with each strike of thunder. Olivia ran after Walter, her dress heavy with mud, too afraid to slow. Rain plastered her hair to her face, yet she bit down hard and pressed her weight against the sagging gate he braced with his shoulders. "Hold it steady!" Walter's shout cut through the storm, his broad frame strained like iron against the hinges. Olivia threw herself into the gate, hands numb with cold, refusing to let go. A steer lunged from within, the impact hurling her backward toward the torrent of mud sweeping across the yard. But a hand like steel clamped her waist, hauling her upright in one swift pull. His breath burned hot against her ear. "I told you this is dangerous." Olivia only nodded, lips pressed tight, eyes wide in the storm. Together they forced the gate closed, drove the herd inside, calmed them until the bawling eased. When the last beast settled, both collapsed into the mud, the rain still beating down in endless fury. Back in the house, the door slammed against the gale, shutting out the storm. They staggered into the darkened parlor, near spent. Water streamed from Olivia's hair, her hands trembling with cold. Walter's shirt clung soaked to his chest, each line of muscle thrown in stark relief. They dropped to the floor against the wall. A long breath escaped them both. Then laughter burst loud, sudden, ringing through the dim house, release after strain. But laughter faded into a quiet, uneasy stillness. Walter turned, for the first time truly seeing her. The dark dress, drenched, clung close to her shape, tracing curves he had glimpsed only in passing. His gaze lingered longer than it should. Olivia felt it, her breath catching. She rose, too, quickly, hands fumbling at her dress. I should change," she stammered, eyes down, fleeing the weight of his stare. Walter did not stop her. He remained seated, his gray eyes following, stirred by a tide he had never known. Olivia climbed the stairs, heart pounding wild. In her small room she shut the door and leaned against it, chest heaving. Outside, the storm roared on, but what shook her most was the look in Walter's eyes. No longer cold, no longer distant, but shadowed with a hunger unspoken. Her hands trembled as she pulled at the sodden cloth clinging to her skin. The fabric peeled away slowly, heavy with water, until at last it slid down, leaving her shoulders bare beneath the lamp's flicker. She wrapped herself in a thin towel, eyes blurred, not from rain, but from a tide of feeling she could not name. The hinge creaked softly. Olivia spun. The door stood ajar, and in the frame, Walter filled the space, his tall figure casting a dark shape across the wooden floor. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a sure, quiet click. That sound rang sharp in the small room, like the stroke of a blade cutting through the distance between them. The lamplight flickered, throwing their shadows across rough-hewn walls. Rain still clung to Walter's hair, dripping down the breadth of his shoulders, while Olivia stood with nothing but a thin shawl, her damp skin shivering beneath. She turned her back, trembling, her bare shoulders pale beneath the wavering light. In that moment the gulf between them color passed. Deceit drew down to the space of a single breath. Walter stepped forward, each stride heavy but sure. His hand came to rest on her shoulder, heat spreading where cold had lingered from the storm. He paused, his fingers tightening slightly, his voice a low rumble behind her. I was disappointed when I first saw you, not because you lacked anything, but because I had been fool enough to expect another face. Olivia tilted her head, eyes closed, braced for judgment. Yet his words came slow, each weighted like iron. I lied in my letters. I spoke of poverty, because I wanted someone who would stay for me, not for this ranch. When you stepped down from that coach, not Shirley, not some painted blossom, but you, I found myself grateful. A tear slid down Olivia's cheek, mingling with the damp of her skin. She turned to face him, his gray eyes no longer cold, but lit with something rare, truth and desire. You don't know, Walter went on, voice roughened, how long I've grown tired of loneliness and pretense. And you see through me. Olivia could hold back no longer. Her hand rose, brushing the rugged line of his cheek, still damp with rain. At that touch, the walls between them crumbled. Walter bent, his lips finding hers. Their first kiss came not in haste, but deep, heavy, as though two forsaken souls had finally met in the storm. The shawl slipped soundlessly to the floorboards, the signal of something new. Walter drew her into his arms, pressing her against the hard chest, still wet with rain. His warmth spread, driving out the chill from her trembling skin. His coarse hand slid from shoulder to arm, fingers tracing every line. Olivia lifted her face, breath quick, eyes half closed as she gave herself to the strange safety in his touch. Walter brushed her brow with his lips, then her cheek, then the corner of her trembling mouth. His kiss deepened, slow and reverent, as if afraid to break the spell. When she shuddered in his embrace, his lips trailed to her neck, warm and insistent, breath thick between them. His hand followed the length of her back, waking her skin with each stroke. Olivia's head fell back, her breath spilling out in a sound she could not contain. They let the tide carry them. No fear, no shame, just two souls. One who had hidden truth, one who had been cast aside, now found in one another's arms. Heartbeat to heartbeat. The oil lamp burned low, their shadows alive upon the wall. In that small room, Walter held her as though she were rare, while Olivia, for the first time, knew what it was to be chosen, not as a substitute, not as an afterthought, but as herself. When the storm inside them eased, Olivia lay quiet in his arms. Walter smoothed the wet hair from her brow, kissed her crown, and murmured, "You're not anyone else. You're Olivia, and that's enough." In that moment, she knew the distance was gone. A true love had begun. Not for wealth, not by force, but because in each other they had at last been seen. Toward evening, Walter led Olivia up the high plain behind the ranch. The red dirt trail curved upward, opening at last onto a sweep of green grass where the prairie stretched like an endless sea. The sun sank behind the distant ridges, flooding the sky with crimson, soft fire settling over all it touched. Olivia stood still, the wind lifting her dark curls. Her chest swelled with something between awe and peace. "If you hadn't let me stay," her voice trembled, "I would have had nowhere to go. Thank you, Walter." He was quiet a moment, then turned. The fading light traced every line of his weathered face, each crease at the corner of his eyes, every mark of years endured. "No," he answered, voice low but steady. "It's I who should thank you, Olivia. Had you not come in Shirley's place, I might never have known the most precious thing in my life. Maybe fate meant to bind us." Her throat caught. She felt his rough hand find hers, fingers lacing tight. Their eyes met longer, deeper than words could ever carry. Then, as if pulled by the strength of the earth itself, Walter drew her close and eased her down onto the grass. She lay beneath the wide sky, the scent of soil and new grass rising around them, tangled with their quickening breath. Walter bent to her, his lips pressing hers. The kiss no longer cautious but fierce, untamed, as though to claim back every year of loneliness. Olivia clung to him, her arms locked about his neck. The wind brushed over them, lifting her skirts, bearing warm skin against his. Walter's hand tangled in her thick hair, pushing damp curls aside, sliding to the nape of her neck. His mouth pressed to her throat, leaving marks deep and burning, pulling shivers from her chest. Olivia trembled, but not with fear. Her hands, unsteady, found the line of buttons on his chest, slipping them free one by one in the dim glow of sunset. Walter let her, his eyes never leaving hers, as if to carve this sight into memory. They folded into each other there beneath the open sky, with no walls, no barriers, only the fire-red heavens, the warm breath of earth, and two hearts beating in unison. Their kisses stretched long, his hand tracing the length of her spine, gentle yet fierce. Olivia pressed her face against his chest, hearing the thunder of his heart echoing her own. In that moment, every shadow of being the bastard child, the replacement, the unwanted bride dissolved. She was no longer measured, no longer compared. Walter was no longer a distant figure. There was only man and woman, giving themselves in trust and truth. On the grass, sweet with summer, in Walter's arms, Olivia let the tide of love sweep her strong, tender, wild, and real. Rumors spread across the prairie like wind. Folks began to whisper that Walter Morgan was no struggling veteran at all, but master of one of the richest ranches in the territory. Then one evening, as the sun slipped behind the mountains, a fine carriage rolled to a stop before the porch. From within stepped Shirley. Her golden hair shone, her dress gleamed, her blue eyes bright with staged tears. Olivia stood on the porch, a basket of fresh-picked vegetables still in her hands, her heart clenching tight. "Sister Olivia," Shirley's voice broke as she reached forward, grasping Olivia's hand, soft, cold, trembling. "I regret it all. I was wrong to refuse. Walter, the letters you wrote me, I read them again, every word, and I see now how true you were. You deserve a wife like me, not anyone else." Olivia froze. Shirley's fingers clutched hers, tears streaming down pale cheeks. To any bystander, it was the picture of a fragile girl pleading for forgiveness. But in those blue eyes flashed something sharp, something only Olivia could see. Walter stepped from the stables, halting a few paces away, his brow furrowed, chest tightening at the sight. Shirley weeping, Olivia stiff and silent, her hand trapped in another's grip. Shirley turned toward him, voice breaking. "Do you remember the letters we shared, your mornings on the prairie, your nights alone by the fire? I told you of my dream, to be the wife of a good man. We were happy then, weren't we? Walter, you know the woman before you is the one you truly need." Olivia's throat locked. She knew Shirley twisted the past, wielding it like a blade to pull Walter close, yet she could do nothing but clench her own hand in silence. Then Shirley leaned nearer, wiping tears, voice dropping to a whisper, meant to cut. "Olivia, that day I was never ill. You," she stabbed the words like daggers, "you slipped something into my food, made me sick, so you could take my place. You always wanted what was mine." The accusation struck like steel through the air. Olivia's eyes widened, her body rigid, her voice lost. Walter stood unmoving, his hand tightening at his belt until his knuckles whitened, his face darkened, brows drawn, gaze shifting from Shirley's trembling act to Olivia's stricken silence. A dry wind swept across the yard, lifting dust into the tense space between them. Olivia's chest constricted, as if the very air had been stolen. She looked at Walter, the man she had dared to trust, dared to love, now mute before such slander. In his eyes lay something she could not read: doubt, confusion, or a restraint too heavy to break. Each passing second widened the gulf between them. Shirley let go at last, turning fully toward Walter, her voice shaking. "Please, believe me. I am the one you once chose. I am the one you wrote to, not her. Walter said nothing. He turned aside, avoiding the eyes of both women, his hand gripping the leather strap at his hip, shoulders taut. The wooden porch beneath Olivia seemed to sway. A single thought rang in her head. I am about to lose everything. Morning light streamed through the kitchen windows, spilling bright across the wooden floor. The table was laid, full, fresh bread, smoked meat, steaming coffee, yet the air was so heavy that Olivia longed only to flee. She sat at the far end, quietly lifting spoon to plate, her eyes down. Across from her, Shirley pressed close to Walter, too close, her pale hand resting on his sun-darkened one, as if by long right. Her small shoulder leaned in, her head brushing his arm. Do you remember? Shirley cooed, her voice honey-sweet. The first letters you sent me. You spoke of winter nights alone by the fire, and I wrote of the garden behind my house. I kept every one of them. Every word of yours. The sound tore at Olivia's chest. Her spoon clinked against the plate, but she dared not look up. She wished only to swallow quickly, to leave the room, to escape Walter's averted eyes and Shirley's feigned intimacy. Walter sat silent. He neither pulled away nor returned Shirley's touch. Only now and then his gray gaze flicked toward Olivia, awkwardly chewing, rigid at the table's edge. Then his voice broke through, rough and low, cutting Shirley short. Enough, Shirley. Eat your meal. The room froze. Olivia's head lifted for a heartbeat and caught his eyes storm-dark, drawn taut as a bowstring. Yet the weight of that gaze fell not on Shirley, but on her. Blood chilled in her veins. Why did he look at her as though she were the cause of it all? Her lips parted, no words forming. Walter shoved his chair back, rose, and left, boots striking hard across the hall until the sound faded. Olivia sat numb. The food before her turned to ash. Shirley sighed lightly, plucked a piece of bread, and bit as though nothing had passed. That afternoon, sunlight slanted low, casting long shadows across the ranch yard. When Olivia stepped from the kitchen, the sight before the porch stunned her. Housekeeper May was setting a travel trunk on the wooden steps. Shirley's blue gown snapped in the wind, her face flushed, her eyes blazing with fury. Walter stood before her, tall and immovable as a wall. I believe your visit here has gone on long enough, his voice rang, each word heavy as stone. It's time you gave this house back to my wife and me. Olivia caught her breath. The words struck clear, no pretense, no half measure. For the first time, he had named it plain, my wife and me. Shirley's face drained, then flared. Her lips trembled. You choose her? Walter gave no answer, only stood firm, his gray eyes hard as steel. Shirley's heel struck the boards with a sharp crack, loud as a hammer blow. You'll regret this, Walter Morgan. You have no idea what you've thrown away. She swept down the steps, skirts snapping, clambered into her carriage. The whip cracked, wheels thundered, and dust rose to swallow her into the trees. From the doorway, Olivia watched, her heart pulled between relief and unease. The carriage dwindled from sight, yet Shirley's lies, her venom, her morning theatrics still clung like smoke. Walter turned, his eyes finding hers. For an instant she thought he might speak a word of explanation, of reassurance, but silence held. He only turned, striding toward the barns, his broad frame fading into the shadow of evening. Olivia pressed her hand against her breast. The fear of losing everything was gone, but in its place lay a new uncertainty, a love declared, yet carrying a fresh wound. Walter came back from the yard, his eyes locking on Olivia standing on the porch. The sky was sunk in dull gray, yet his gaze carried more storm than the heavens above. Without a word, he strode forward. Long steps, shoulders drawn, every movement holding the weight of a silent roar. Before Olivia could retreat, he swept her up, his arms iron-strong around her small frame. Walter! Her voice broke, but he did not stop. He carried her through the hall, shoved the door wide, and laid her down on the wooden bed. The mattress shook beneath her. She looked up at him, heart pounding wild. He bent close, gripping her wrist, his mouth crushing hers with sudden fury. The kiss was a storm, rough, consuming, leaving her no air to breathe. Tears spilled hot down her cheeks. The taste of salt made him halt. His breath came heavy, but his hold loosened. Instead of restraint, his fingers brushed her wet cheek, voice cracking low. "Why didn't you fight back? Why endure Shirley's touch? Why let her lay claim to your man without a word? Don't you know how to burn with jealousy, Olivia?" She trembled, lips pressed tight, eyes wide with fear and ache. Walter's face hovered close, his voice breaking into thunder. "Do you even need me? Or would you let go easy? Hand me over without a fight? Your silence, it drives me mad." Her breath caught. In that instant she understood he was not furious at Shirley, but at her silence, her failure to claim him. "Walter," she whispered, tears streaming. Suddenly, she pulled him down, crushing her lips to his. The kiss was fierce, unyielding, a detonation of long-buried need. Breath tangled with breath. Between their kisses she gasped, "You are mine." But I was afraid. Afraid you would never choose me. Afraid I'd be left behind again. Walter stilled, searching her eyes. This time the fury was gone. Only a bare, unguarded heart remained. "Fool," he murmured, pressing his forehead to hers. "I need you, not Shirley, not anyone. You." In that moment, fear met fear and dissolved. She felt his breath warm against her skin, his hand at her back firm, not violent now but claiming. She clung to him, no hesitation left. The oil lamp flickered, shadows swaying over the walls, casting their entwined bodies in trembling light. Anger burned down into love, fierce and consuming, yet tender. Gasps rose, hearts thundered. They found each other again, wilder than before, yet gentler too. In Walter's arms, Olivia knew she was no longer the substitute, but the woman chosen, desired with heat and truth. The room filled with warmth, a haven carved out of timber and firelight. Beyond, night winds swept the plains, but within them, the storm had passed. The rain that had battered the land through the night finally broke. Morning opened, clear and wide, white clouds drifting slow against a sky of deep blue, the prairie carrying the fresh breath of damp earth. Drops clung to the willow branches by the porch, glittering like tiny shards of crystal. In the distance, cattle grazed easy, no longer hollow-eyed with thirst after the long drought. Olivia sat on the wooden steps, watching sunlight spill across the fields. Her soul felt washed clean, as though the storm had scoured away every doubt and wound. Behind her, the heavy tread she knew by heart drew closer. Walter stepped out, his tall frame casting its shadow over the porch. He lowered himself beside her, saying nothing for a long while. Only the wind moved, whispering against the fence, the faint rustle of grass under hooves carrying across the yard. At last, his rough hand found hers, their fingers lacing together as if made to fit. "Olivia," Walter's voice came low and hoarse. "You're not a stand-in. You never were. You are my only choice." The words cut through the wall she had carried all her life. Her shoulders trembled, her dark eyes brimmed. She had known cold glances and silence sharp as abandonment. Yet now, here was a man looking straight at her, calling her by name, choosing her not for duty, not for land, but for herself. Tears slipped down her cheeks, hot, unburdening. She turned to see him fully in the morning light. The lines carved at the corners of his eyes, the streaks of gray through his dark hair, the storm-worn gray of his gaze. What she saw no longer felt harsh, but sheltering. "All my life," her voice caught, unsteady. "No one ever chose me for who I am. Today, I believe, I've found a true home." Walter said nothing more. He only drew her close, his forehead resting against hers, a quiet touch heavier than any kiss. In that silence, their hearts spoke what words could not. By afternoon the prairie shone like new cloth spread wide. Young grass burned green, pools of rainwater mirrored a sky rich with gold. Walter and Olivia still sat side by side on the porch, doing nothing at all but listening to the other's heartbeat, letting trust take root. Walter struck his pipe, the smoke curling into the breeze. He looked over and saw Olivia resting her head on his shoulder, eyes closed, lips tipped with a faint smile, not bright, but deeply at peace. "We'll face hard days yet," he said, voice steady. "The land, the storms, the stares of others. But from now on, we face them together." Her fingers pressed softly into his. "I don't ask for easy, only to know I can stay with you." The wind carried the scent of wet earth, of young grass, of damp wood from the porch. The scene was plain, yet vast enough to feel like a vow carved into the world. The sun lowered, painting the horizon red. Walter pulled a thin blanket over her shoulders, his arms circling her fully. They sat unmoving, watching the sun sink, as if it were their whole life stretching out ahead. In Olivia's heart, one truth rang clear. This was no longer the tale of a girl forced to take another's place. It was the story of a woman chosen. And in Walter's arms, the eternal promise was spoken not with grand words, but with presence itself, solid and enduring as the land beneath them. It was a spring morning, and the small town at the foot of the mountains carried a different air. Along the red dirt road leading to the church, garlands of wildflowers hung from wooden fences. Folks from every stretch of the valley, ranchers, hired hands, neighbors from miles out had gathered. Word of Walter Morgan marrying Olivia Carter had swept through the prairie, and no one meant to miss it. Olivia stood in the little room behind the church, her hands twined together, trembling. The wedding dress, sewn by May the housekeeper and a few townswomen over long weeks, fit snug against her frame. It was no grand finery, plain white fabric, sleeves puffed just so, but its simplicity made her feel wholly herself. A small wreath of grass and wildflowers rested on her dark curls, carrying the sweet scent of the open fields. May stepped close, laying a hand on her shoulder. "You deserve this day, Olivia. Remember, he chose you. For you." The words blurred her eyes with tears. She pressed her lips tight, nodded, and drew a long breath as the organ inside began to play. Walter waited at the altar, tall and firm in a gray suit. He was no man for polish, yet the morning light streaming through the stained glass marked him with quiet strength. His gray eyes, often cold, seemed fixed on this moment alone. When the doors swung wide, Olivia entered, all whispers stilled. Only the sound of her steps on wooden boards carried through the room, steady, one after the other, toward him. Walter raised his gaze, and she saw it there, certainty, granite strong. No hiding, no doubt, only the truth. "This is the woman I choose." She reached him, and when he held out his hand, she placed her smaller one within it. Together they turned toward the old minister, listening as his deep voice delivered blessings plain yet sacred. "In storm and in calm, in drought and in plenty, in wealth and in want will you remain at one another's side." Walter's grip tightened. His voice rang, clear. "I will." Olivia's eyes brimmed as she answered, steady though soft. "I will." Applause thundered through the church. Laughter broke loose, a few whistles echoing high. Never before had Olivia stood at the center of such joy, she who had once lived only in the shadows of neglect. Walter leaned down, brushing her lips with his in a kiss. It was brief, tender, yet enough to mark the day forever. After the ceremony, the churchyard rang with celebration. Pies, smoked meat, and jugs of cider filled long tables. Children raced about, tossing handfuls of flowers, while the grown raised cups in toasts. Walter stood among them, yet his gaze never left Olivia, who blushed under the well wishes of townswomen. He stepped forward, his arm circling her waist, declaring plain and proud, "She is my wife, my woman." Her cheeks burned, but inside, a fire warmed her to the core. For the first time, she stood at the center not because of anyone else, but because she was herself. By nightfall, after the last guest had gone, Walter and Olivia returned to the ranch. The porch still held the faint scent of wildflowers scattered that morning. They sat upon the steps, the same place that had known their silences, their tears, their promises. "Olivia Morgan," Walter said low, his voice etched into the night air. She turned, her dark eyes shining. "Yes?" He clasped her hand, resting his brow against hers. "This is only the beginning. Hardship will come again. But today, and for all my days, you are the one I choose." Olivia nodded, tears falling as a smile spread across her lips. That night, under silver moonlight over the quiet plains, the two souls once wounded, once cast aside, were bound at last in their rightful place. No longer shadows of the past, only the eternal vow of a wedding sealed in truth. The years passed like a stream across the prairie, slow but unyielding. From the day of their simple, sacred wedding, Walter and Olivia stepped into a new chapter, one of toil laced with laughter, of harvest and herds, of long nights warmed by the fire on their porch. The following spring, a newborn's cry rang through the wooden house. Olivia cradled the small boy in her arms, tears streaking her cheeks while her lips curved into a smile. Walter stood beside her, his large hand trembling as it touched the tiny fingers of his son. His voice rasped low, thick with awe. "Thomas, you'll grow strong on this land, with love that will never run dry." The child became the light of their home. On restless nights, Olivia rose to sing soft lullabies, while Walter fed the fire, his gray eyes fixed on wife and son with a tenderness he never tried to hide. In the years that followed, the Morgan Ranch grew. From a few dozen head, the herd swelled into hundreds. Walter built new barns, hired more hands, yet he never abandoned the work himself. Folks often saw him leading horses to water or planting beside Olivia in the garden. Olivia became the heart of the ranch. She cared not only for her family, but for every soul who worked their ground. When sickness struck, she brought soup. When children lingered after chores, she taught them letters by lantern light. Soon, neighbors began calling her by a name of their own, our Mrs. Morgan. At harvest, the ranch rang with joy. Neighbors gathered, bringing pies, cider, and guitars. Walter and Olivia sat among them, watching Thomas play with the children, their hearts full with a happiness both simple and enduring. One day, Olivia bore a daughter. The child's eyes were gray like Walter's, but her smile gentle as her mother's. Walter lifted her high, his laugh booming across the prairie sky. "Ella," he said, naming her. "You'll grow with love enough that you'll never fear being left behind." Olivia's chest swelled at the sight. In that moment, she knew the wound of being the unwanted child had finally healed. This home, with Walter and the children, was hers by love and choice, not by force. 5 years after their vows, the Morgan Ranch had become one of the most prosperous spreads in the territory. Yet for Walter and Olivia, what mattered most was not land or cattle, but the hearth they had built. Evenings found them on the porch together. Thomas, now grown taller, practiced rope tricks in the yard, while Ella played with a crown of wildflowers in her mother's lap. Walter smoked his pipe, pride brightening his rugged face as he watched. Olivia leaned against his shoulder, eyes tracing the fire-red horizon. "Do you remember the first day?" Walter asked, voice low and warm. Olivia smiled, squeezing his hand. "I remember. If you hadn't let me stay, I might never have known what true happiness feels like." Walter kissed her hair. "It wasn't a chance. It was meant to be." The community around the ranch changed too. No one whispered of the black bride sent in her sister's place anymore. Instead, they saw Olivia as a woman of courage and grace. Young wives sought her counsel. Children tugged at her skirts to learn their letters. At each autumn festival, Walter and Olivia sat in the honored seats, not for wealth, but as proof that love could outlast prejudice and deceit, and stand as a pillar others leaned upon. One golden evening, Thomas chased across the yard while Ella clung to her mother's side. Olivia sat on the porch, her gaze full of the life before her. The wind carried the scent of grass. The sun sank gold as it had the first time she stepped onto this land. She remembered the past, the years called bastard child, the silent meals, the cold eyes of her father and stepmother. Those memories faded now, pale as a dream. What lay before her was truth. A home, a husband who chose her, children who called her mother. Walter came to sit beside her, his arm slipping around her shoulders. "Olivia," he said softly, "we've come a long way." She rested her head on him, her eyes shining. "And we'll go farther still so long as we go together." The prairie glowed in sunset fire. Children's laughter echoed. Cattle lowed in the distance. And in each other's arms, Walter and Olivia knew their story had never truly ended. It had only begun and would endure, as steady as the land, as endless as the sky. If this story has touched your heart, leave a comment below. Share your thoughts or your own tales of love. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss more warm and stirring stories from the Wild West. Tell us what you think. Is love found later in life the truest kind of all?